Happy Friday, everyone. Hello. Welcome to each of you. I want to ask that you do us a favor as we're just getting settled into today's VodCast community. First and foremost, we acknowledge that many people are holding a lot of different emotions this week. And so as you get settled in to hopefully find some level of support and comfort by being with this community today, we ask that you'll just take a moment with a quick check-in and share one word to describe how you're feeling right now at this moment. And we want to hold space for every emotion that could be coming up for those in this community. We also encourage that you share where you're joining the conversation from. And if you wish to have this community to connect with you after this hour of time together today, then also feel inclined to share your LinkedIn information. But we want to hold space for every bit of emotion that could be coming up. Bianca, I see you, tired, grateful for a long weekend to rest and unpack my emotions. I could not agree more. I invite as many of you as possible to just share one word of how you're feeling as we're joining today and as we've been processing lots of horrific news, reliving lots of tragic events that are triggering in many regards for so many of us. We just want to hold space for that right now. Thank you, Amora. Thank you, Ralph. For those of you who are just joining, we're just taking a moment just to settle in. We're not rushing today's podcast. We really feel a sense of just taking our time. And we're inviting everyone just as a way of a check-in to please go to the chat and share one word to help us to know how you're feeling, how you're showing up to today's conversation. Also, let us know where you're joining the conversation from. It's always great for us to know who's joining and where they're joining from. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am always delighted every Friday to be able to connect with each of you. Many of you are longtime friends of our VodCast community, and we don't take that lightly. We appreciate you joining us, especially on a week where there's such heaviness, and even in consideration of the holiday weekend that many people will jumpstart today. The fact that you're here lets us know that you gain value from being connected to this community, and we're really grateful for it. So cameras are encouraged and welcome, but certainly not required. I always like to share that so that our community knows that we love to see smiling faces. But we also recognize that some of us may be just joining in an auditory capacity, and we're just grateful in whatever way in which you want to engage in today's community. We do have our closed captions activated today. That is our way of practicing disability inclusion. And so I wanted to draw your attention to that. And we're going to go ahead and get today's VodCast conversation started. But again, it will feel maybe a little bit different from before. Okay, so this is Intentional Conversations VodCast. It's where we meet weekly to help intersect conversations that will address topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging with leadership in business. And we're, again, just honored that you all have taken the time to be a part of this community and with us today. So I started out with a request for everyone that is connected with us in this VodCast community to just take a moment to share one word in the chat that helps us to know how you're feeling and showing up to today's conversation during this incredibly heavy week. And although we're at the end of May, May has been Mental Health Awareness Month. And I think that we need to continue to stay in the vein of honoring the needs of our body and helping others to do the same as we navigate and process recent events, as well as maybe also relive some of the events from 2 years ago as we acknowledge that on May 25th was the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And many of us are still processing that from 2 years ago. So the heaviness is real. And we want you all to take great care of self, whatever way that looks like for you. Find an accountability partner, talk it out, rest, step away, take breaks, whatever it is that's going to help you feel nourished. I want you to be mindful of that. We have been sharing for the past few weeks that our Intentional Conversations VodCast is going to also have a podcast component, and we're so delighted that we've been able to launch that actually a few weeks ago. And so there are new podcasts that are out there. So if you are or you know someone who likes to get their content by way of a podcast, then certainly put them on to the great content that hopefully you have been enjoying week after week. And we will continue to release new content every week, not only in the VodCast capacity, but also in podcasts. And so thank you in advance for your support. So as we normally do, it's important for us to let you know what you have to look forward to in terms of upcoming guest co-hosts for our Intentional Conversations VodCast. And we have Friday, Pascal Lasambe, and we're so excited to have Pascal. He is one of our consultant partners, and we're going to be discussing the intersection of neurobiology and neuroscience and DEI, cultural intelligence and competence, and Synergy's shared humanity framework, which is Pascal's consultancy that of course is also in this space. And so we look forward to welcoming him. The week after, my friend Aiko Bethia, and I'm so excited about this one. Many of you may follow her work, but she is a powerhouse and voice of authority, and I hope that you will get to know her if you aren't yet familiar with her. But we're going to be discussing creative works as a tool for empathy building. My, don't we need a lot of that? Providing space for creativity and imagination for people of color, and how leadership has been used as a tool to center whiteness and diminish people of color. So really look forward to what I know is going to be a rich conversation on that Friday. And then you all are familiar also with Sasha Thompson. I know that we are in frequent communication with Sasha. She is a great supporter and champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're going to be talking that week about DEI credentials, working with practitioners, the future of DEI and trends within the industry, and also self-care for practitioners. And so if that's some topics that you feel you would really gain value from being a part of, we hope that you will join us on that particular Friday. Now, as we always do, I want to give a formal introduction to my friend, my fellow DEI champion and advocate, and she is certainly a friend of this podcast. She has been in attendance on multiple occasions, but today she's actually going to be up front and center, and I look forward to being in conversation with her. Rachelle, Carrie. And Rachelle is a DEI consultant who channels cultural change through her voice in the global community. Rachelle's passions center around collaborating while amplifying impact through sharing knowledge, resources, and creating an inclusive culture for the thriving, diverse community at large. Additionally, she utilizes the invaluable voice that women of diverse backgrounds have to empower themselves and others. She's relentless in her pursuits. She has written 2 ebooks and is writing 2 along with 4 other children's books for young girls of color. This journey has brought her to create a podcast called Diversity Connects Us, featuring women and men of color. I've had the pleasure of being on Rachelle's podcast and really appreciate her extending her platform to me. And not only does this podcast is called Diversity Connects Us and feature women and men of color, but also while navigating race and gender in the workplace. That's an additional focal point of her podcast. The topics range from tokenism, microaggression, colorism, sexism, gender and race, and mental health. In addition, she is a fierce researcher, a reader of all books, yogi, and community partnership builder. So in your own way, broadcast community, please help me to welcome my friend and our guest co-host for today, Rachelle, Carrie, and I'm actually going to spotlight her so that I can make sure but we are in really good communication with our guest host for today. So Rachelle, I just want to say a few words before I give you an opportunity to greet this audience. You and I were talking at the start of the hour, and I thank you for continuing to maintain this commitment. And I said to you that I was anticipating and would have not at all thought a second about it if you were to have reached out to say, I'm not feeling it this week, sis, you know. I know that you have not spoken publicly about all that's been happening because you're still processing. And my commitment to you, and I want to share it broadly with this community as well, is that I don't want us to be scripted today. I want us to feel the freedom and the agency to just hold space and time as we feel the need to do so. While we do have questions, we may or may not get to them. And if not, that's totally fine. We'll look forward to inviting you back. But you and I both felt this tug of just being and allowing this community to not be inhibited by, you know, having to put on a facade or a mask, how we're feeling, how we're processing. And so I just want to amplify that as I invite you to just lean in and greet this audience in whatever way that feels appropriate for you. And then we'll just talk. We'll just talk and process together, my friend. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to hear you and have you know, this extra support that we definitely all need during this time. And as you were going through my bio, I was overwhelmed. Above from being overwhelmed from everything else, I didn't realize that there was so much that I had done that I don't give myself accolades for. But I want to say thank you so much for that introduction and for, you know, for being able to lean in to this process. I have to say it's been, I can't even find the words. I'm so sorry.
No, do not be sorry. Do not be sorry at all, Rachelle. I want you to know that there's so many words that have appeared into the chat. So what you're feeling, you are not alone. You're not alone. I know for certain that this community and all of us that care deeply about this work, we've had our moments. And again, you have decided not to publicly talk about this. And you know, today will be the first time. And so as much time as you need,
right.
We're here standing in solidarity with you. We are here feeling the grief along with so many others. It is hard. And I don't want to minimize that for anyone in this community. So yeah, people are saying, we're here with you. We're here with you and for you. So
right. You know, it's interesting. I didn't even realize that. And I have to go back because I know it was the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And when he was murdered, I think it brought a level of emotional intelligence within me. I had to figure out what it was that I was feeling. And I had to go through a process. And my initial process was anger. And when that happens, I stay away from social media. I don't read what's going on. And I tend to try to understand my process first before I even can converse and have, you know, a respectful conversation with anybody in my space. And I remember something pivotal that happened. I have a lot of good friends back home in Montreal, which is where I lived for 35 years, that were calling me during that time. And they were not Black. So they were my white, very good friends. And they were reaching out with apologies. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Is there anything that I did that made you feel that you were microaggressed or you know, or felt like the other? They came to the forefront and opened up this conversation, which I honestly did not expect, but they felt compelled to start the conversation. And in feeling that, in filling the space for them, we allowed that conversation to begin, and it bridged a lot of the gaps. And then, you know, they were able to implement policies within their workplace to create a space. I wouldn't call it an ERG because it really wasn't an ERG. It was a space to have everybody of minority to come every day on the hour to be able to discuss the feelings that they were feeling in respect to George Floyd. And I didn't have that space. And then shortly before that, I was called the N-word by many students throughout the year, as you know, because I was also an educator. So there was a lot of things I hadn't processed. And then through that process, I realized now there was, sadness and despair. And then within the sadness and despair, I thought, is this the space that I want to stay in? Or is this a space that I can come out of and do something worthy to help the community? But again, it was a process. I had to stay within that space of sadness and crying and despair. And then I had to process everything else that had gone on in the last 35 years that I had lived in Montreal. So that process for me took a lot. And as you know, there's a lot of compassion also as DEI practitioners. So I was dealing with my own way of processing all these racial injustices. And then I was also compassionate and feeling what was going on around me and with people in our community. So I think now that, all of this has happened, again, I'm not a news buff, but I did see some information come up in my news feed. And it's the only reason how I knew of these last two shootings. And then the heaviness, like you said, set in. And then once I realized I was dealing with like this heaviness, I thought I can't post anything on social media because it's not a place where I want to deal with my emotions yet. And then sure enough, we got a call from my daughter's school, who's only 7. And they said they were taking a moment of silence at 10. And her dad and I had decided not to have a conversation with her. So that was this morning. And when I saw the email, I figured, is this the climate that we're actually living in, where I have to have this discussion with my 7-year-old daughter? And it's something else that I'm processing.
Yeah. No, that's real. Thank you for your realness. Thank you for your vulnerability and your realness. So when the news of the shooting at Robb Elementary took place, I was traveling that day. I was in a session all day long, and it was, by the way, a beautiful session. I was surrounded by all of these incredibly inspiring and magnificent minority business leaders. And so it was a beautiful day. And then once I got back home, because I was not at all tuned to the news, I turn on the news, flip through social media, and it's everywhere. And I immediately felt deflated. So I felt robbed of even the great high that I was on by being able to experience what I felt like was progress, just hearing all these wonderful stories. And I felt it was devastation. It was unconscionable. It was sad. And one of the things that you and I, Rachelle, talked about is, as practitioners in this space, some will sit back and they'll say, well, you chose this work. And for some of us, the work chose us, so we couldn't hide or run from it, right? But either way, we're in this space. So we make that conscious decision. And I get that by being in this space, there is a certain level of tolerance that people will presume that we have, and a certain level of resilience that we have as we are navigating organizations through how to properly navigate these types of situations to stand in support of their colleagues who are triggered and dealing with a lot of emotions. But it does not take away the human aspect of who we are as practitioners too. And the fact that so many practitioners in this space are in this space because they're drawn to the work because of maybe their own intersecting identities, where they've had to experience oppression or discrimination or micro inequities, is just as triggering for us as well. And I don't necessarily think that sometimes that is talked about enough and is held in a regard of where the support is provided and the understanding is provided. I saw a post where someone had shared that she was scheduled to facilitate a session this week and she was well prepared for it. I wish I could remember who it was because it's someone that I believe is connected to this VodCast community. But she said that her client had counseled on her the day of, and it was because they had the wherewithal to say, and this was not even an organization that was directly in the community or even in the state of Texas, but they realized that the heaviness of this week with the shooting, and then of course, the anniversary of George Floyd's murder, this session, which was intended to be a session to help deepen people's knowledge and understanding of broader DEIB topics, no, we want to give that time to people. And she said that it created this great sense of pride and appreciation for that organization as a client partner, because how in which they also articulated it to her, the consolation is, we want you to also be able to have the time to process. And I know that I have not necessarily experienced that, but I thought to myself, this is an organization that I don't know anything else about them, but this is an organization that in that moment, they understood the assignment. And it gave me at least a glimpse of hope when I felt like there was so much that I can point to that did not feel hopeful. But it's those small moments that I feel like we're going to have to gravitate to just keep us afloat, keep us aware that the work can't stop. I've heard a lot of people comment on thoughts and prayers. We're tired of that. Yeah, I mean, as someone who is a strong believer, prayers, I will never get tired of it, but I understand the sentiments of we need action and we need people in power to be much more thoughtful, to move towards action, because we can't stop this. We can. And so it's been hard on so many levels. I'll pause here and just let you jump back into the conversation in whatever way that you want to contribute to the dialogue.
Right. I think it's imperative that we do move forward to action. Like you said, I'm observing like you are, and I'm not posting as much, but I'm definitely observing. And there are a lot of thoughts and prayers and, unity symbols. And the way I see it, it's not enough. Mm-hmm. And I think it's definitely not enough. Policies need to be changed, legislation needs to be changed. There needs to be action at the top level. And that's what we talk about when we talk about DEI. DEI has to be top level down. And that's where the changes can really begin. Because, the fact that, again, I go back to the shooting, we want safe spaces for our children. And when it happened, I have to say a lot of my friends didn't send their kids to school.
Right.
They were afraid. They were uncomfortable. They thought they were going to have one last moment, right, with their children. And I don't think it's a way we want to live. We can't live in fear all the time, because it's not a comfortable place to be in. And as those prayers, like you said, I pray as well. I pray, I do affirmations, and it helps on the day-to-day. But when it's an issue that's bigger than us, then there has to be decisions that have to be made in order for us to be safe in navigating these spaces. And I don't believe that it's definitely possible. Wouldn't you agree? I think it's possible to be able to put our heads together and to be able to understand the root of the problem, because now it's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid. They're masking the problem. They know the real root of the problem. And, before moving here to the US, I moved here in 2005. So I was in Montreal before. And I didn't realize how, and this is probably for another show, but I didn't realize how can I say this? How the gun laws are so lax. And it was something that I was always uncomfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to try to understand where it comes from and why the laws are not tightened to be able to keep us safe, because now all the schools are just beefing up in security. Right. I know my daughter's school, you know, that in that same email, they said they're looking into security, they're looking into police officers guarding the school, and they're looking into more security cameras. But that creates a level of discomfort among children as well, right? Realizing that they have to go now through security checkpoints before they even go to school, right? Before they even go to school. So there's a camera now at the bus stop. There's a camera now at the stop sign. There's a camera when you come into the school. And then, you know, we have to take our mask off so they could see our face, so they can identify, identify us. Then we have to show our license, and then we have to sign documents to say who can pick up the child, who can drop off. You know, it's definitely not a space that I'm comfortable navigating in above, you know, all the other things that, you know, all the other things that we come across. So I think in communicating our traumatic events, you know, remaining silent is definitely, you know, something that's impacted the community. We can't remain silent, and we have to, like you do, you know, use our voice in ways to channel that energy so we can make a greater impact.
Mm-hmm. So what, from your perspective, Rachelle, do you believe organizational leaders should be leaning into at this moment to provide the support and the space that colleagues are needing as they're holding so much that's creating lots of stressors that are really, you know, potentially almost with certainty impacting the way in which they're showing up to the workplace?
In regards to this moment, is what you're referring to, this moment. Mm-hmm. You know, we can talk about emotional intelligence, and I think emotional intelligence is really it's an essential aspect of good leadership, because you're able to critically analyze your own emotions and recognize and deal with them, so that you're able to deal with other emotions, or, you know, everybody else's emotion. So I think it's really imperative for the organizations to be able to understand that, like you said, we have to lean into the space, irrespective of how uncomfortable it might be, and that people will be feeling triggered at work. You know, we were talking briefly backstage, and I read that article that you wrote as well. You know, people need to have that space to be able to process, because being at work is triggering.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Being at work is really triggering. And I think in order for us to really be empathetic and to understand where the other person is coming from, will release a lot of the pressures in what everyone is feeling.
Yeah. No, you just referenced an article, and my colleague Anna was kind enough to place it into the chat. But it's an article for the benefit of this broader community that I wrote last year, April of 2021, around the topic of identifying signs whereby your employees could be triggered and what to do to help provide that support. And so that is into the chat if you find it, anyone in this community, of value. But you know, you said something a moment ago, and it was the word acknowledgement. You know, I think that what people are failing to realize, some people are failing to realize, is that, to your point, if they're silent, it causes people to perceive that they are unaware, they weren't paying attention, they have no emotional intelligence. And what is that doing for colleagues within an organization? What kind of message is that sending to colleagues in an organization when this is not something that's even addressed? So what would you say to that, Rachelle?
As I think it's really important, like you said, it's to acknowledge that something tragic happened, or many tragedies have been happening. And I think people will also be more loyal. I talk about this in the book. I think people will be more loyal and show up and lean into work when they are validated and they're feeling acknowledged, to be able to bring their whole selves to work. Because part of these events chip away at who we are, because we don't have the space to process the information if we're continuously having to show up at work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when, organizations understand that, this is something that we're all going through,
Right.
not just us as minorities, that everybody is going through this, a moment of rest or respite, I think, is really, really important, so that they can process that emotion. A lot of people I know, I still have friends who are in the corporate world who are calling in sick because they just cannot even fathom going through the motions of dealing, and they're all parents with young kids, and they can't process the information and show up at work. So it's important to acknowledge that, and to give, people the time that they need, or, have the opportunity to be able to work remotely in a safe space, if they consider that to be a safe space, so they can process the emotions, so they can show up and lean in a little bit more and feel more acknowledged and validated at work.
Yeah. I saw on social media where a white male leader had posted, and this was, I really do believe it was coming from a place of honest curiosity. But the question, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it was along the lines of, unfortunately, we live in a society where there are a lot of bad people. So every single day, a lot of bad things have the potential to happen. And while those tragedies are atrocious, life goes on. And so his question was, as a white male leader, how are we expected to now normalize just, always allowing space and time, because every day there could be something different. So his point was, how do we balance this? How do we balance this as leaders who really are wanting to try to make sure that we are maintaining the fact that there is work to be done, but also we want to do it in a way that is people-centered too. And so if this were your client, you're someone that you were in communication with, what would you say to someone who's thinking along those lines? How should they be arriving to a conclusion around this very curious question that I suspect a lot of people are having?
Right. Again, it goes back to leaning into that space. I believe in, in a space, corporations, and there's a few that I know of that I won't name here, that are giving people the time to assess the situation, time during the day, 45 minutes or an hour, to be able to process exactly what is going on, and to go back and forth, and just to have those conversations. Because I think in remaining silent compounds the stress, the physical stress, the mental stress, the spiritual stress on an employee even further, because they're not dealing with it. And these corporations are succeeding only because they've given them, okay, this is the 45 minutes that we're going to have to be able to discuss XYZ. And in discussing it alone, because now you're bringing it to light and you're sharing what's inside of you for so long, then it allows them the space to feel safe. I think right now people are looking for a space to feel safe.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. No, absolutely. So I want to shift a moment, and I want to talk about what's on the horizon. June is right around the corner, and we have Juneteenth, and we have Pride Month. And so one of the things that I know has triggered a lot of people this week is as they've seen different brands and big box organizations to leverage what they believe is an appropriate way of celebrating and acknowledging and recognizing Juneteenth and even Pride Month, that there are some missteps that are occurring. We know the Walmart story with the ice cream has certainly circulated around social media. And there are other examples as well that I can point to. What are you advising to your clients, Rachelle, in terms of how to combat the notion of avoiding this, being perceived as performative around what should be a meaningful way to recognize and honor the individuals that these observances and they're part of these communities in which these observances are why they exist?
You cut up a little bit.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I didn't hear you.
Okay, did you hear any of that? Let me just repeat the question. Okay, I'm so sorry. And I'm not
That's
sure.
okay.
I'm hoping no one else is having issues. If you are, please alert us into the chat so I can be aware of it. So my question was, we're soon having June upon us, right? That's where a lot of recognitions of Juneteenth come from. And then it's also Pride Month. And what we're seeing right now that is causing even deepened level of heaviness that people are experiencing is that they're being triggered by what's perceived as performative acts of brands and corporations that are not meaningful. And it is creating more anxiety, more feelings of being unsafe and unappreciated. So how are you advising your clients around the appropriate way to recognize and to honor observances like Juneteenth and Pride Month, so that it really is done in a way that meets the satisfaction of honoring the people that are part of those communities?
Right. There's someone I spoke to who's in marketing, and it's a very interesting question because there is, like you said, it's performative. So what's going on is that they have, and again, this is a Fortune 500, actually it's a Fortune 100 organization, and it's exactly that. So their marketing tactic and budget went to brown and Black people on various billboards and on social media, and they felt that that was enough to be able to share and their concerns or their affinity to be able to, push the DEI needle forward. And in fact, on the other side, what was happening is that, this particular corporation that I'm thinking of, they had, very many issues that they were dealing with because they were still, microaggressed. There wasn't enough representation. Although the marketing showed differently, they were actually not practicing exactly what they were marketing to the public. And I think what happens in that is that there is a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication as to what to do, because it's not about the marketing. It's how do we change policies? How are the policies and regulations are going to change within the organization? What strategies are being used? Is there a pre and post assessment as to where they were and where they are at? Have they worked with anybody in DEI to be able to understand how it is to implement these strategies to be able to change the cultural mindset? It's a cultural mindset, an organizational mindset. And it's not benefiting us to be able to see this. It's actually making us very angry and uncomfortable to see, right? To see all this, like you said, performative action. What is it that's stopping the organizations from leveling up? I think there's a lot of fear in receiving backlash because, again, it's about their numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about the numbers. And I think that's what is frustrating a lot of people. It is about profit over people. And it's creating a lot of resentment, a lot of feeling of unsafety. And so I want to share my screen quickly. And I know that Tracy, you have some commentary that you want to share. So I'm going to come to you next. So get prepared for that. I'll let you unmute yourself and I'll spotlight you. But I don't want to assume that everyone that is a part of today's community know exactly what we're talking about with the examples that have been brought up so far. So I want to just quickly share this community. And so here is the example of the Walmart Miss Great Values is Sam Walton's brand, and it's the ice cream celebration edition of Juneteenth ice cream. And you can see that, there was a lot of thought that went into the packaging to make sure it was connected to Juneteenth, at least from the standpoint of even the colors of what they believe would be tasteful and appropriate. But here's the latest one, y'all. This one, I really had to question if this was even real. Vaseline, limited edition, equitable skincare for all, original healing jelly. What? So many questions.
Performative.
That's what we're tired of. That's what we're frustrated by. That's what angers us. No words. No words. And so, with that in mind, Tracy, I would love for you to come off mute and to share. I want to spotlight you.
Yes, I'm trying. I'm trying to turn my camera on too. Thank you. So this week I had we sent out a message about the shooting, the mass shooting. Last week we sent out a message about the shooting, and one of the things that was sort of concerning was that we weren't clear on who should be part of drafting the message. It was not a given that DEI should have been, front and center. That's one thing. You're always trying to interject because it's still not top of mind for everyone. But the other thing is, I was in a call and one of the people on the call said that they check out of the news because it's too much and they don't have the energy for a lot of the negative news. This person was a white male who's very interested and involved in creating safe spaces for people. So he's a very sensitive person, but it made me think how people can just opt out, but I don't feel like I have a choice because I have the skin and I'm going to go through these experiences over and over again. And I don't just get to opt out. Now, there are days when I don't watch the news to protect my own sanity, but in general, I don't get to say, oh, no, not participating. Right. And so I just wanted, that brings up the question about accomplice versus ally and some of those distinctions. So I was hoping that you could speak to that because that came up again this week also about allyship. Is it even really a thing? Like, does it even work when people can just say, oh, I'm too much, it's too much right now. I can just, I'm sorry, I was supporting you, but now like I can't, So I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Rachelle, would you like to take that one?
Yeah. So, when we think of allyship, it's very interesting And I think there's a personal story that I can share when I think of allyship. So, many times wherever I worked, there was always a feeling of not, and again, it always goes back to DEI, but there was a feeling of, not feeling included or excluded, and just a misunderstanding of who I was as a Haitian woman. And along the way, I came across again, in DEI and also in education, because I was a teacher for a very long time, that there was one principal. She was also Caribbean. And I remember feeling very uncomfortable, realizing that she was offering so much support and allyship within the administration with me as an oncoming new teacher at the time, that I didn't know what it felt like. So it made me feel uncomfortable, because I thought, well, what's behind it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So the allyship for me, her name was Ms. Andrews, was the fact that there was information always imparted to me in ways of leveling up. This is what you could do if you want to be vice principal or principal. This is at the time. And volunteering information, literally holding my hand along every process of the way. If you can't get in touch with me, you can get in touch with Mr. Andrew. If you can't get in touch with Mr. Andrew. And there was a community within the administration that came together and was always there to help me advance and to understand that support was necessary to also feel included in what everybody else was doing.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what real allyship really is, imparting the knowledge, imparting the information, offering as much support as you possibly can to anybody that comes in that space, especially someone who has that type of position. She, like you said, she never checked out. She didn't have the time to check out. She couldn't check out. And she was always leaning into how can we help, our employees. And I think that's something that's really, really imperative to be able to thrive in an organization, is the allyship. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, Rachelle. Something that Tracy mentioned as she was, presenting her question was the fact that sometimes allyship is also referred to as being an accomplice, and I've heard that a lot myself. And sometimes I'll even, communicate that so people will know that it is talking about, allyship. The challenge that I personally have with the word accomplice, though, is that there's negative connotation to it. And if someone is going to sacrifice to advocate for human basic rights that everyone deserves,
right,
I prefer for it not to be viewed as negative, right? And so I tend to like to use the word ally more so than accomplice, but I understand why the accomplice has entered into the conversation, because we really want people to recognize that at bare minimum, it is about action. And you can't be an accomplice if you aren't putting forth some action towards the group that you are allying for or advocating for. So I just wanted to bring that to the conversation. Thank you again, Tracy, for your question. So we have about 12 minutes left, and I want to give any individual that's part of this community today an opportunity to also contribute to the dialogue. If something is coming up for you, even if it's just going to be helpful for you to just socialize how you're processing the events that have surfaced this week, would love to give you that opportunity to share. You can feel free to raise your hand, or you can just simply unmute and I will allow you to share. Okay, and maybe while folks are thinking about whether or not they would like to share and what they will share, I want to give you an opportunity, Rachelle, to dig a little bit deeper into emotional intelligence, because all that we've been speaking on today, emotional intelligence is really a part of the solution. We need to get people to lean into that more and to become much more competent around how in which they are navigating and understanding how people are showing up emotionally and how to best support them. And so you do have an ebook that's coming out. I would love for you to share with this audience a little bit about the premise of the book and how you think, what kind of value you think it would bring to this topic and other areas where people are needing to strengthen their emotional intelligence muscle.
Right. Thank you for talking about the book. I think, the book was, and I'm probably going to jump a little bit. I believe there was a process. Again, we go back to the process of emotional intelligence. It's really being able to understand one's own emotions to be able to address the emotions of others.
Right.
And I have to use my daughter, who didn't have words to all her emotions, and her emotions were, very, there were many crying bouts or temper tantrums. And then once I was able to, give her a word to what she was feeling, then that emotion dissipated, only because she had a more understanding of what was going on inside her. So when I released the book in December, there were 2 books. So this one it's really, to be able to create an open course where we can be filled with love and freedom. Yeah. So when we think of emotional intelligence, and I said this earlier, it's a good aspect of leadership. We want to go back and talk about leadership because it's critical for the success of the business world, right? Emotional intelligence happens when we, again, recognize and deal with emotions within ourselves and others. So when you think of human resources, let's say, human resources managers, irrespective of their, academic competencies, I think it's an essential trait for all employees to have to build that empathy muscle.
Right.
And right. So when you think, it contributes, this, again, we talk about that myth, how it contributes to, not being successful or having a workplace that is toxic. When we talk about toxicity, that's really what it is. So, when employers and business owners and managers start hearing about the emotional intelligence muscle, yes, it's effective for organizations because once it resonates with you, then it's going to resonate with your employees to have that truth that needs to be articulated. It's like grieving. People need that space to be able to grieve, where it's, even if it's a day or a minute, to process the information. And once you know that it's important to hold that, for positive change, then people won't feel stuck. And you're not feeling stuck at work, but you're feeling stuck emotionally. And if we can't, so if we can't show up, again, we talk about, and again, on my podcast, we talk about the same thing. You show up, it's a safe space where we can communicate and lean in. And like we're doing today, I had to lean in. This morning I was teary because I had to lean into my emotions, to be able to understand it. And that's how we become more effective in the workplace and in our personal lives.
And would you say, Rachelle, that one way to build up your competency around emotional intelligence is to first and foremost be attuned to your self-awareness, your own emotions, right?
Absolutely. And to be able to regulate that self-awareness in various situations, which is a whole other muscle in and of itself, because it takes a lot of inner work to be able to process what really is going on inside you. But I believe it's, it regulates people to produce healthy responses, which comes to self-management. That's however you're going to respond is because you already know what process you're going through.
Right.
So you're no longer reactive.
Yeah.
Right.
So in the chat, we have shared your emotional intelligence ebook, a toolkit for managing DEI. And so I hope that this community will certainly take advantage of that resource. I want to dig a little bit deeper just in the few moments we have remaining, because, again, we have centered the importance of emotional intelligence. And we just spoke to one strategy, which is self-management, self-awareness. What are some other tips that you can leave this audience with if they are really identifying that this is something they want to grow and increase their competency in? What are some tips that they can put into their practice?
Like you said, we talked about, self-regulation, we talk about empathy and self-awareness, motivation, social skills. I believe, when we talk about social skills, again, it's another muscle. But, I'll give you a brief scenario. You're in a board meeting, it doesn't seem to be going well because people like you aren't on board with any of the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So your higher emotional intelligence would be to make good eye contact and ask open-ended questions, right? Like you do. You ask open-ended questions, and you also proactively practice active listening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's right. I think that's something we don't do enough of because we're so concerned with all the other questions we have for the other person that we're not actually listening. And listening doesn't just mean being present. Listening means your brain is empty and you're processing what the other person is telling you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, a counselor told me this. He said, so he's phenomenal in every which way. And I think what the main takeaway was, have a conversation with somebody and verbatim in 10 seconds, repeat what they have said.
Mm.
He's a therapist, actually. And once you have done that, you've already built empathy with the other person because you've repeated what they've said. And then you give them the space to say, let's say a highlight of their day in 30 seconds or less. They repeat what you have said, and then the connection happens, and then the empathy happens. Because what we've actually done was listened, you've repeated verbatim what the person said, vice versa, you've created that connection as well. And then that leaves the space for more communication and less misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Rachelle. Really, really rich. I want to share two comments that are in the chat right now because I want you to get the benefit of knowing the value that you've brought to this community today. One is from Ralph Johnson, and thank you for your comments, Ralph. But he says, it was helpful to hear Rachelle's question that she posed to herself in her initial sharing. Do I choose to stay in the space of sadness and despair? Or do I choose to act? I agree, Ralph. That was really impactful. That thought helps move me from the incapacitation that sadness can bring and back to active engagement on work that impacts attitudes and behaviors. Thank you for the conversation. It's just what I needed. So thank you, Ralph, for joining us. And then Bianca Mays shared, this is so helpful for me. I think a part of me has to let my empathy go in order to build resiliency to what's happening, the constant violence and the need to perform at work. I'm interested in resparking my empathetic side. I would say that those are, based on those comments, these are really big wins for the time that we've spent together today. So thank you for powering through and very, very much sharing your thoughts as you were processing. This community stands with you. We send you love and light. Your work is important. We see you, we hear you, we value you. And I just want to thank you for saying yes to our invitation. So I would love to give you the final, 2 minutes to close this out in whatever way that feels appropriate to you. But Rachelle, what would you like to leave this audience with today?
I like we talked about, I think it's really important it's interesting what Bianca said, we want to build resilience to be able to handle all these obstacles that are coming to us, because then we feel like we'll be stuck, like he was saying earlier, you don't want to be stuck in the sadness and despair, and you want to be able to do something proactive. Mm-hmm. And I really think starting with our families and our friends in building those empathetic skills so that we can bring to the workplace so we have a more human connection. Yeah. I think we need to be more humanly connected. And my mom always said, when she left Haiti, she said I never understood, the neighbor not talking to the neighbor, or the neighbor not introducing the neighbor, because the door was always unlocked and people were coming in and out and sharing food and bringing sugar and flour. And, they were just part of a global community, sharing and loving each other. And I think that's what we need to go back to. We need to be human-centered and people-centered, and understand that we all come from that space, and we all come with our emotions, and to be able to make more meaningful connections.
No, I love that. A beautiful visual I know was painted for me as you were sharing those thoughts. And so I'm going to let that carry me through this day, even in the midst of the heaviness. But thank you so much again, Rachelle. And thank you to all of you who've joined us today. If you found this valuable, then be sure to alert those in your community to catch the replay. We'll see you all next week. Have a wonderful holiday weekend with great rest. Thank you.